Before his 1975 conviction for the killing of James McBratney, John Gotti had stacked up a whole host of arrests for various crimes. Let's check it out. I'm James Gladwish and welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today, we're going to take a quick look at a selection of arrests that John Gotti had as a young man in organised crime. In 1977, John Gotti was formally inducted into the Gambino Crime Family. He was around 37 years old at the time, and would serve in the crew of Mafia captain Carmine "Charlie Wagons" Fatico. But leading up to that, John Gotti, the future boss of the Gambino crime family, had an arrest record dating back to the 1950s, when Gotti was a teenager. Let's review Gotti's early brushes with law enforcement. John Gotti, who can be seen in this photo as a young child, is first listed as arrested in 1958, when Gotti was 17 years old. An FBI document from the late 1970s detailed all of Gotti's arrests. It stated, John Gotti arrested 6/25/1958 on the charge of burglary of a storage yard at night. The FBI file also contained the original arrest report made by the NYPD. It states, Gotti John, date and time of arrest 6/25/58 at 2:35 a.m. His address was listed as 2232 Dean Street, Brooklyn, and the location of the arrest was in Brooklyn. He listed his occupation as labourer, and the crime charged was burglary at night. It states, while acting in concert with 3 others also arrested, did force lock off door and carry away sheets of copper without owner's permission. As we can see on his rap sheet, on June 1st, 1959, an 18-year-old John Gotti was arrested for disorderly conduct, and he was again picked up by the police 2 years later in May 1961. 1961 was a landmark year for John Gotti. He was 20 years old and had his first child, a daughter named Angel. The mother, a young woman in her late teens, called Victoria DiGiorgio. John and Victoria's first child, Angel, was born before the pair would marry in March 1962. On the 4th of March 1963, John Joseph Gotti was arrested in Brooklyn for the appropriation of lost property and having an uninsured vehicle. The definition of appropriation of lost property is as follows. Appropriation of lost property occurs when someone finds lost property and keeps it with intent to permanently deprive the true owner, without making any attempt to return it. This offence is considered a form of theft or larceny. 2 years later, in 1965, John Gotti's rap sheet states that on the 26th of January, John Gotti was arrested for unlawful entry and possession of bookmaking records. This arrest occurred in Brooklyn. Just 2 months later, John Gotti was arrested in Howe Park, Suffolk County, New York. The charge was attempted burglary in the 3rd degree and unlawful entry. Here is the mugshot from that arrest. John Gotti was 24 years old at the time. His record states that Gotti received a 1-year sentence in county jail. It appears that John Gotti was released from county jail after serving a few months, as later that year, in mid-October 1965, just 2 weeks before his 25th birthday, John Gotti was arrested for grand larceny of a vehicle. The NYPD arrest record states, Gotti John, date and time of arrest, 10/13/65 at 12:05. The location of the arrest was at Rockaway and Riverdale. He gave his occupation as truckman. The crime charged with grand larceny auto. It states, person, in concert with 1 other also apprehended, did ride in a stoled vehicle NY Reg 9Z 1682. Interestingly, Gotti told the police that a male Negro unknown to him gave him the car. The vehicle was a 1965 Chrysler. This charge was a violation of his parole from the burglary conviction earlier that year, and it appears that John Gotti was sent back to Riverhead, Suffolk County Jail to complete his earlier sentence. In January 1967, John Gotti, along with his brother Gene Gotti and also close friend Angelo Ruggiero, were arrested for hijacking. The official charge as listed on his rap sheet was theft from interstate shipment. This was a federal crime and made the newspapers at the time. As one newspaper reported, FBI grabs trio and hot furs near Kennedy. An early morning roadblock set up by FBI agents at Kennedy Airport yesterday led to the recovery of a valuable cargo of stolen furs and wedding dresses, and the arrest of 3 Brooklyn men charged with theft from an interstate shipment. Scheduled for arraignment before a US commissioner were John Gotti, 27, of 311 8th Street, his brother Gene, 21, of 1240 Herkimer Street, and Angelo Ruggiero, 27, of 2049 Atlantic Avenue. The FBI said the 3 were trying to move the cargo out of the airport in a rented truck. If convicted, they could receive 10 years in prison or a $10,000 fine, or both. John Gotti was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but the sentence did not start until late February 1969, 2 years later. While awaiting the start of his sentence, John Gotti was arrested again in early 1968 on the charge of grand larceny and possession of forged instrument, which can mean that he was in possession of false documentation. John Gotti would start his federal sentence on the 28th of February 1969. His record states that he was initially remanded in Newark, New Jersey, and he was then transferred to Lewisburg Penitentiary in May that year. It was in Lewisburg in 1969 where this photo was taken. On the left-hand side, John Gotti's future underboss, Frankie DeCicco. In the middle is John Gotti, and on the right-hand side is Angelo Ruggiero, a future Gambino Crime Family captain. The following year, in 1970, the following photo was taken. From left to right is far left, unknown. Next is Frankie DeCicco. Next to him is future Gambino family mobster George Remini. Then John Gotti in the middle in the glasses. Next to him is unknown. And then finally, on the far right, is allegedly the greatly feared future Gambino family mobster, Michael Mickey Boy Paradiso. After John Gotti was released from prison, he was arrested again on the 20th of April 1972 for public intoxication and for a charge relating to Penal Law 120.15, which is being menacing in the 3rd degree. The definition of this is as follows. Penal Law Section 120.15. Menacing in the 3rd degree. A person is guilty of menacing in the 3rd degree when, by physical menace, he or she intentionally places or attempts to place another person in fear of death, imminent serious physical injury, or physical injury. Menacing in the 3rd degree is a Class B misdemeanor. In May 1973, low-level criminal James McBratney was shot to death in a bar on Staten Island. John Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, and Ralphie Wiggs Gallione walked into the bar and, allegedly posing as law enforcement, tried to get James McBratney to leave with them. When McBratney refused, Ralphie Wiggs shot him to death. The McBratney hit has been covered in many books and documentaries, and Mafia legend states that James McBratney was killed on the orders of family boss Carlo Gambino because McBratney had allegedly kidnapped Gambino's nephew, Manny Gambino. As I have covered in a previous video, this is incorrect. I won't go into too much detail now, but essentially, James McBratney had nothing to do with the kidnapping of Manny Gambino. James McBratney had been part of a kidnapping gang that had been snatching made men off the streets and holding them for ransom. It is potentially for this reason that he was targeted. But it had nothing to do with the kidnapping and killing of Carlo Gambino's nephew, which was conducted by a completely separate group involving a man named Henry Sentner. Anyway, after a spell on the run, John Gotti was arrested and charged with murder and unlawful flight to avoid murder prosecution on the 3rd of June 1974. With the help of famous mob lawyer Roy Cohen, John Gotti famously took a plea deal for attempted manslaughter in the second degree and was sentenced to a maximum of 4 years in prison. It appears that this was John Gotti's last arrest before he became a made man. Gotti was released from prison in 1977, and in the latter part of that year, potentially late October, he was formally inducted into the Gambino crime family. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on John Gotti's early arrests in the comments below. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.